Mimer. We're beginning the Basi Mimer for our year. We're we're going to be explaining the Mimer. The Rebbe is going to be analyzing Ois Yud Beis from the Hemshech of Basi 12th chapter of the four Mimer Hemshech of the Frierdiker Rebbe that he prepared for the Stalkus on Yud Shvat Tafshin Yud of 1950. So to be able to get to Ois Yud Beis, the Rebbe is going to go through a summary of the first 11 chapters of Basi Lagani, the Frierdiker Rebbe. Then he's going to say what the point is, what the Frierdiker Rebbe is now going to try to explain with Ois Yud Beis, and then analyze Ois Yud Beis, the 12th chapter of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mind. Basi Lagani Achoisi Kalom, I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. The one whose yard site it was, in other words, with yard site of the Frierdiker Rebbe, explains based on what the Medrash says. To my garden means to my bridal chamber, my special place. To the place where I was there primarily. That the primary Shechina was down here below. Through the different sins that the Medrash enumerates over there, and that the Frierdiker Rebbe also mentions in short in his Mimer, Silku as Shechina they caused the Shechina to arise and to leave and depart and go from below to above. Then 7 righteous individuals arose and drew the Shechina down again from above to below. Until Moshe Rabbeinu Yisrael, the faithful shepherd of all Yidden, that he is the 7th. And we know that all 7s are favored. That he brought the Shechina down from the first firmament, from the lowest level to, in other words, the lowest spiritual level to the earth. That is the goal and the purpose, is to bring the Shechina down here below, because that is the goal, to have the home down here below. So Moshe Rabbeinu accomplished the purpose of the entire creation. But so that this matter should be in a settled manner. Not just what Moshe Rabbeinu did during Matan Torah, which brought the Shechina down, but post Matan Torah, we want to have that the Shechina should remain with us. Immediately after drawing the Shechina down from the first Rakia to the earth during Matan Torah, it says the command, they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell amongst them. The Indian Mishkan, concerning the level of Mishkan, and the Rebbe is right. We can explain. I'm going to be switching between the two terms. The pasuk calls it a Mikdash. It was actually a Mishkan. So he right away says parenthetically, the Mikdash ikar Mishkan, that the Mikdash is called a Mishkan, or Mishkan ikar Mikdash. They're interchangeable terms, and the Mishkan is called a Mikdash. That is why when the Yidden built a Mishkan in the Midbar, they were fulfilling the command that it said in the Torah of Asli Mikdash, you should make for me a Mikdash. So when it comes to building the Mishkan, even though, we might say that in the Mikdash there isn't physically that particular building, but since the Mishkan and the Mikdash are interchangeable, so what it says concerning the Mishkan applies, at least spiritually, in the Mikdash as well. It says, Namar, it says, Vasisas Akrash Mishkan, we shall make the boards to the Mishkan, they should be standing cedar wood. So it wasn't logs like a log cabin that we have pictures of America in the early years, that one was lying on top of each other, but rather they were logs or beams that were standing straight up. And it's explained at length in the Hemshech of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mimer, that the letters Keresh, Kufrei Shin, shows on the manner of the Avodah, that one needs to transform the negative letters of Kedesh, which could mean a conspiracy, it could mean sheker, falsehood. We need to transform all that negativity and make it into support, into an integral part of the Mishkan. The ultimate service is they should be shittim wood. What is the idea of shittim wood? To make it into shtus the kedusha, to make it into folly of holiness, which means a super rational type of service. That's avoided beyond reason and knowledge, understanding. That's what it means. Shtus the kedusha is serving Hashem super rationally. Top of page Zion. Through that, we fix up the shittim, the foolishness of the other side. A person does not sin unless it enters into him a spirit of folly. So when a person uses folly in a positive sense, he uses the folly to serve Hashem in a super rational way. So that transforms and changes the negative folly. The folly that leads to Avedis. By days initial Makavan least spark of the crater. Through that we have filled the purpose that Hashem wanted to have a home down below. Avoiders are Nasai de Bnei Yisrael. This avoid is accomplished through Yidden. Let's explain in many places. Dafkai de Bnei Yisrael. Toilet Torah mitzvahs pull awesome only through Yidden. Does the Torah mitzvahs affect what they have to do? Therefore, this is all what the Mimer speaks about, the Friedrich Rebbe's Mimer. Therefore, Yidden are also called the hosts of Hashem. But also the literal meaning of Tzivais is Melashon Tzava, from the word Tzava. Now, Tzava itself has in it three explanations. The Friedrich Rebbe says in his Mimer, Sheyesh by Shloshim Perushim, it has in it three meanings. Tzava, Melashon Anshe Chayil, the most common and well-known meaning is Tzavas in the word members of an army. Yisrael, Anshe Chayil, Yidden are soldiers, Hamalim, Mashlimim, Ritzayim, Shemal, Machmal, Baruch, that to fulfill the will of the King of Kings, the Eibishter. That's another pirush for Tzava, Melashon Zman, Mugbal, and Tzava is also in the word a set and limited time. Like it says, behold, there is a set time for man upon this earth. That this meaning of the word Tzava indicates the manner that a person has to do is avoid. What does it mean? It tells us the manner. Fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs is in such a manner of being enclosed in the limitations of time, and thereby it's also enclosed in limitations of space and place down here below. Now, if I may make a short note, to my recollection, in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, he doesn't say this word about Tzava being, in other words, he mentions this translation of Tzava being a set time, but he uses it more in an avoidedic type of way. Since there's a set time for a person upon this earth, so therefore a person needs to be cognizant of the fact that he won't live forever, and there's a limited time that he has to accomplish what he needs to accomplish, and therefore not to delay, not to procrastinate, not to put it off for later, that he will do what he has to do. He needs to take care of it immediately, because when the time comes, he's not going to be able to say, hold on, I still need to do X, Y, and Z. But the Rebbe uses the word tzav over here, also meaning set time, to bring out a different concept. Seemingly, again, I don't recall the Friedrich Rebbe applying it this way, that since the idea of dir b'tachtonim needs to be involved in this world, so because we need to be involved in this world, that is why it must be done in such a type of fashion that it permeates and deals with time and deals with place. Because the Rebbe says place parenthetically, but so Tzava doesn't have to do with place, but the Rebbe always emphasizes in many Rambarim that time and place are interconnected. And the idea that something occupies a certain space means it occupies a certain time and vice versa. So that's the point, that Torah mitzvahs is something that, because it comes down to this world, it is something that is limited in time. if I may add further, this is not totally different than what the Friedrich Rebbe is saying, because essentially what it's saying is that we have a certain amount of time that we have to fulfill if we're doing our Torah mitzvahs, the amount of time that we're placed here on earth. Why were we given a certain set amount of time? Why shouldn't we be allowed to do Torah mitzvahs forever without a set amount of time? Because part of the purpose is to permeate time. And because we have to permeate this earth, which is made up of time and space, so therefore we are as well limited within time and space as well. Okay, line 16, further, he says, "V'tzava lashon tzivya v'yofi," and the tzava is from the expression beauty and distinction, how each the word tzava can mean each one has its own distinct beauty and form. Now, the Rebbe says, in Yofi, the Friedrich Rebbe says in his Maimer, that idea of beauty by the Eskala shall come again. Where does real beauty apply? When you have an intermingling of many colors. That's the idea that the avoid of Yidden is accomplished through their becoming and interconnected together. And through that becomes completed the idea that they shall make for me a migdash, and I shall dwell amongst them in all the aspects of avodah, b'chol prati avodah, and all the different details of the avodah, the way it's done through the Bnei Yisrael down here below, meaning that it involves time, that involves every yid individually, where that is the ultimate level of how it has to be did with that time. Okay, I'd like to keep, since it's a long mimer, I'd like to finish this probably before Yishvat. So let's open it up to questions, but let's keep it direct to what it says over here. Let's not start, comparing it to other places or so on. Let's try to keep it to the page, to what he's actually saying over here. Any questions?
What is he, when he says mixing things, what is he referring to? Like the tribes should all work together, that kind of thing?
The avoid of Yidden, not just tribes. It could be tribes, but we don't necessarily know which tribes we come from to be able to have that type of limitation and say that we don't have, but just in general, that we should be able to work together and complement each other. Not each one is his own thing. I am into Torah. That's what I'm doing. Don't bother me. Or I am into Gemilas Chasadim. I'm a big Baal Tzedakah. This is my thing. Or I have whatever. I learn X amount of hours per day. Don't bother me about anything else. It's there has to be the intermingling of the avodas and of Klal Yisrael. Okay, bottom of page Zion, line 23. Now, up till now, the Rebbe summarized the first two mamarim of Basi, meaning the first 5 oisius of the first mimer, the second 5 oisius that are in the second mimer, titled Hayeshavas Begani. Now the Rebbe is going to go into the third mimer, beginning the third set of 5 oisius, excuse me, which doesn't even have a title really, but it's more of a, it just says to be able to understand the idea of Purim. It's a mimer that was being prepared for Purim, but the Friedrich Rebbe had not yet prepared the Divrei Maschil, the title. Friedrich Rebbe first wrote up the Mamarim, and then afterwards tied it into a pasuk. After the one whose yahrzeit is, the Friedrich Rebbe concludes the 2 first Mamarim in the ideas that's explained in the last 2 pages. So now the Friedrich Rebbe is going to approach in the third mimer what are the empowerments and capabilities that we are given to be able to fulfill this avodah that we have to do. And he prefaces this by a general preparation in Ois Yud Aleph. So in other words, even though we're going to talk about Ois 12, before talking about Ois 12, Ois Yud Beis, he's going to explain how Ois Yud Aleph is leading into that. So he says, Ois Yud Aleph, he explains, Tzava, Kosher, Muhammad, the idea of war, the idea of an army is connected with war. That we find similar to this in the Medrash concerning the name Tzvakis above, that Hashem is called by the name Tzvakis as well. That how does that happen? That comes about when we do our avodah in our way of an army. So then that evokes and that reveals by Hashem the level of Hashem being like an army and fighting battles. So what does it mean by Hashem being an army and fighting battles? So he says, so he says, when I go to war, top of Peiches, but in the wicked, that's what I'm called by the term and by the name army. General way how the Yidden act in their running of the world, or in their how, not the running of the world, how they act within the world. Durchgehend the Welt, going through the world. Mitzvahs, according to Torah mitzvahs, and the fact that the world should act according to Torah mitzvahs is in a way of a war. That is the way how Yidden have to engage with the world. What does that mean, that Yidden engage with the world in the way of a war, in the way of a battle? Like the Zohar says, that we eat bread at the edge of the sword, meaning our engagement with the world, eating and consuming of bread, which means all of our physical interactions, has to be in a way of a battle. He says, Friedrich explains the idea of war when it comes to Hashem is as follows. In a war, there are two components. One thing is to gather the spoils of war, that a king will fight a war because he wants to have the spoils of the conquest. Another reason for fighting a war, and the main idea, the primary idea of war, it's for the sake of victory, so it should be according to the will and wishes of the king.
The order is opposite.
I'm sorry.
The order is opposite. You don't start with the shalal. First, you have to win the battle. Then you can take the shalal.
He's not saying the order of what we do things in. He's just saying two components of war. And
I agree,
he
wants to go
from he wants to lead us into, he's whetting our appetite. He wants to go from the less to the most prominent. Not that he's going in the order of the war. Excuse me.
Okay.
Like he's doing it explain. To get to receive and to get the spoils of war. That is a war that's based on reason. That's a logical war. In other words, I want to make a certain gain. I need to acquire something. And it doesn't mean necessarily spoils as in the monetary sense. Spoils of war could also be gaining territory and so on. So that is all based on logic. Therefore, there's a calculation how much effort one needs to invest in the war, so it should be worthwhile according to the spoils that one wants to reach through it. Excuse me. In other words, like in any venture, when one is trying to gain something, so one usually calculates, if I want to gain X, Y, and Z, how much am I willing to invest? Whether it's monetary investment, whether it's investment of effort, whether it's investment of time, how much is it worth it to me to be able to get that? A person that, has a dime fall out of their hands and it rolls somewhere under the couch, might not be willing to invest their time and their effort to just move the couch for a dime that slipped out of their hand. But if a $100 bill somehow got slipped under the couch or between the cushions or whatever, yeah, he's going to go ahead and go through, for most people, and move the pillows and move things around and try to find it, because there's a logic to it that for a certain amount of gain, that's how much effort and that's how much koiches I want to invest for that type of gain that I will gain from it. As opposed to the primary idea of the war. And that's the idea of the victory that should be according to the will of the king, should be fulfilled, the king's wishes. Since when it comes to victory, the Maimorim explain, the Maimon of the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, and the Rebbe Maimorim on that explains that the idea of victory has to do with the essence of the king, and he makes distinctions between victory or just being stam chutzpahdik or so on, different types of things. But the true idea of victory, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains, has to do with the very essence of the king's kingship, with who he is, with his very essence. So since it has to do with the very essence of the king, is beyond all calculations, or beyond reason and knowledge. Therefore, be able to evoke by Hashem in a similar manner, that it should be a type of victory that is beyond reason, beyond calculation, meaning to draw down from Hashem a level that's higher, and to say that the Shtalsh was beyond limitations. We also have to do our avodah in a way of not just calculation and say, well, do I have to go this far? Are there heterim? Are there ways how I can get out of it, and so on? No. If I want to evoke by Hashem a level that's completely transcendent, completely beyond reasoning, completely beyond calculation, so my service and devotion to Hashem also has to be in a manner of victory, in a way of beyond calculation. So he says in line 18, emotion is like explained previously, that has to be in a way of the holy folly, beyond reason and knowledge. For this reason, we give out and we spend all the precious treasures that were concealed and covered from many generations of Mois, and we give them over to the officers for the sake of the soldiers. There's also something that's emphasized in many Amorim. It's not for the sake of the officers. The officers only administer the payment and the necessary treasures for the soldiers to be able to do their job. Through the systems of spreading out the treasures, they will be victorious in the war. That will be fulfilled. The will of the king. It's very close. And this, what we just now said over here, which is a summary of, and a bit of an elucidation also, of chapter 11 in the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, is going to set the tone for everything that's going to speak about later on. That it comes to explain the powers that we are given from above. And he explains generally that they are concealed and sealed treasures. In other words, the powers that we are given from above, from Hashem, to be able to be victorious in the war against Klippas, and so on, are considered sealed and concealed treasures. But it's not meant to stay concealed. And the intention, the purpose is only to open them and afterwards to give them to the receivers. That it should be like it says in davening during the Yom Noraim, that the treasure that is good for us, you should open. What does it mean? That the emphasis is good for us. And Yargish, that the receiver should feel that it's what's good for him. Alongside with it being such a high level, alongside with coming from such a high place, sometimes we say, Dalton says in Tanya, if there's a good that's from a very high level, it cannot come down or it does not come down the revealed state down here. And we perceive it sometimes as something that's not necessarily good. So the Rebbe says, no, both things should be. But that on the one hand, it's Oitzer. Oitzer shows a treasure, shows us something that's concealed and very high and removed and above and beyond everything. On the other hand, it's Lanu Tiftach, that it's, or Hatoiv Lanu, I'm sorry. It's what's good to us. So despite being so high and so removed and so beyond everything that we call it a treasure that's concealed, and we'll talk about it some more about the idea of the concealed treasure. Alongside with that, it's revealed down here, meaning that we can appreciate down here in our world, we can appreciate how good it is. Any questions? Okay, let's see if we can make it through one more ice base. It's a short ice, line 3, on top of page test. And he continues to explain in the 12th chapter that's connected to the 12th Yom Hilula, because this mimer was said in Tafshin Chav Beis, which means it was the 12th yahrzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. In the 12th chapter, the mimer explains the specific matters concerning the treasure above, after first giving a general preface about the powers that are given from above. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, to understand the idea of the treasure above. So then he goes on to explain further in Eis Yud Beis, and then he goes on further and further. What is the idea of treasure above? So then the Rebbe is going to ask a very basic concept. How do we even apply the term treasure by Hashem? The idea behind this is the L'chura in a movement seemingly it's not understood. How is the idea of treasure applicable above? It's similar to the treasure that the king does not want to open it. And he doesn't want to use it for the sake of his needs. He is very careful with it. He's very Jalavan, like being not so much stingy, but he's very maybe protective over it. He doesn't want to use it even for his own needs. That's the point of an oitzah, he says. And because it's so important to him, why is it so? He doesn't even want to use it for his own needs. And where is the import expressed? Because the treasure that the king has includes in it everything that was collected and gathered from generations prior to it. And it's more precious than all the needs of the king. In a movement, it's not understood. And therefore, he's not even willing to expend it on his own needs. It's not understood. The Rebbe says, how do we apply this by Hashem? All these type of things about needs and things that are not used for his needs. What do you mean needs? How does needs apply by Hashem? How is it applicable to say that by Hashem there's some things that are his needs? For his sake, one does not touch in the treasures. In other words, there are Hashem's needs, and those needs, the Eibusher doesn't give his treasures out. They remain closed off and sealed. Elim Kain, only when does Hashem open up his treasures? When there's an idea of a war, when you need to effect a victory, it should be according to the wishes of the king. So he says, how's it applicable above to be something that is even higher than the king's needs? Because of that, we do not use it for the needs of the king. On the other hand, only when you fight a war with an opponent, and then we open up. Only then do we open up the treasures that are sealed and closed off. That's above. So therefore, to explain this, to be able to, and this he explains, to be able to understand the idea of a treasure above, it's according to what the Tikkun Zohar says. That the infinite light of Hashem is above and high to no end, and reaches below to no end. Like the Maimer, the Rebbe will explain further about this in Oy Zion before he gets into that. He's first going to explain the idea of Oy Sof and so on.